I never like to base strategy on competition because I don't believe it's a good idea. And I believe it ends up making you very similar to other people and other companies. This is a consideration that if you're an entrepreneur, you should really be thinking about is, why would I compete? If I can find a way to not compete, probably better, right? Harder as an intellectual exercise, harder as a system, is something probably has a lot of risk attached to it unless you understand how to mitigate it.
Shai Bar-Ziv, a dynamic individual with a diverse background in real estate, economics, and teaching, co-founder of Panavanti.
Knowing the process is very important. Very, very important. It will save you a lot of nightmares. Don't be afraid to go in and ask the questions, and make sure you follow up with the people involved in the logistics of it. And centralized communication is a big thing for me. It's like, I want to make sure that if people can be on the same page in one channel, do that. Don't be a messenger.
Could you please share any cautionary tales that you've encountered while assisting your clients in selling their properties?
We had one deal that...
Welcome to Property Passport, the podcast that takes you on a global tour of real estate. I'm Kelvin Poptani, and join me as I interview local experts from each country and explore their country's property market, investment opportunities, and unique challenges. Subscribe now and let's explore the world of real estate together. Today, we have the privilege of chatting with Shai Bar-Ziv, a dynamic individual with a diverse background in real estate, economics, and teaching. Shai holds a bachelor's degree in economics and business administration. Throughout his career, he has worn multiple hats, from teaching guitar and music theory to acting as an investment advisor at Vin Global Inc. Notably, Shai is also a co-founder of Panavanti, a venture that provides personalized real estate brokerage services in Panama. Shai brings a unique perspective to the real estate landscape, from his time in John Hancock Financial Services to leading as VP of Sales at Rapid Phone Center. His journey is brimming with valuable knowledge and success stories. So let's fasten our seatbelts and embark on this insightful real estate journey. Shai, welcome to Property Passport.
Thank you very much, Calvin. It's a great pleasure to be here. What an intro.
Yes. All right. To kick things off, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences in the real estate industry. How did you get started, and how is your journey so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, my journey in real estate started through my wife's family, curiously enough, because my wife's my father-in-law is actually my business partner, which is a strange it's a very odd circumstance, but it's actually worked really great. I mean, we've always gone along together really since the beginning of time. But he comes from a real estate family. They're developers in Venezuela. There used to be developers in Venezuela before all the things that happened there went down. And he was kind of the one that started talking to me a lot about real estate, and he knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and he said, why don't you check this industry out? I think it might be interesting. He's been an investor, he's been a developer, he's been everything in between. His family was for a long time. When he arrived at Panama, he invested in some properties and just mainly lived off of that. But then he kind of wanted the idea of becoming a broker. He is, and I sort of helped him out with that, and we got together, and I very early on, just as soon as I started learning about it, I just fell in love with it. And I realized that it had within it, mainly the brokerage side of things, a ton of abilities that I had already, generated over time. So there was a lot of finance to handle, a lot of finance lingo, and just understanding about investments, which I acquired through my time at Win Global. And the math was pretty easy. Once you worked as an actuary at John Hancock, that real estate math is kind of simple in that way, I really like that the brokerage side also incorporated a lot of my social skills, a lot of my interpersonal skills. And I've always loved sales. So it was kind of, a smooth transition in that sense as well. And it just matched up perfectly. This was a few years back. Then I went and got my broker's license. Then we went and we founded Panavanti along with my father-in-law, Alexandro Carnevali, and another partner, Federico Ferrante, who's one of my dear friends and just an amazing technical guy. He's the CTO for the business. He handles all the things that Alexandro and I have no idea, uh, you know, where to even start on. And these are the kind of things. So it's been a couple of years now, and the brokerage has been growing every year. We've sort of exceeded our goals every quarter, which is just a pleasure to watch. And I'm really focused on the strategy side of things, the operation, aside from the sales. Everybody has to sell initially, if you're in the service business and you're a partner and you're not focused on selling, I don't know what you're doing, to be honest with you. I think that it's a crucial component that everybody needs to have in the early stages of a startup.
Perfect. That's incredible. I can really feel the passion for real estate right now. That's amazing. Okay, let's get to the questions here. It's very interesting. So our listeners are often curious about how to find reliable real estate agents in different countries. Could you share some insights on how people typically find real estate agents in Panama?
Yeah, absolutely. So the real estate profession in Panama, the real estate brokerage profession in Panama is it grows very fast, mainly because the market allows for that growth because the market has been growing exponentially since the 1990s, really. Because there is a ton of development, because there's a ton of incentive for developers and builders to come in, uh, brokerage kind of follows that, and it's really a buyer's market. There's a lot more supply than there is demand because it's a dollarized country where there's a lot of credit, so it's just a no-brainer to build here. And that's attracted a lot of brokers, and you can find brokers very easily on portals for advertising properties in Panama. There's two major portals. One is called compraoalquile.com, buyerrent.com is the translation, and then Encuentra 24, find 24 is kind of the translation, which is big in Central America in general. Those are the big portals where brokers advertise, and if you search for real estate brokerage, you'll get a ton of options on Google. I really like what we're doing with social media because I put a lot of content out that is a lot of free information. So you can find a lot of brokers like me on social media in Panama that are doing a lot of content. I don't think they're quite doing it the same way that we are, and I don't mean to get competitive there, but but it's kind of that's the idea, right? What I would suggest to anybody finding a broker anywhere is brokers have a fiduciary responsibility. You want to get with somebody that you really trust. You want to get with somebody that is going to give you the whole truth regarding a property or a transaction, that's going to guide you through the process and beyond the sales process. Um, so trust is a very important factor in any sales site, but specifically with brokerage. I think that the majority of our buyers, are residential buyers, and a lot of them are not necessarily investors, so they're going to live in that property. So you want them to really like that because they've probably been saving up for years to buy that. So I take it very seriously. The team takes it very seriously. We want to make sure that we do good by selling a property and that we never sell something that we wouldn't buy. So aside, finding a broker is easy. Finding a fiduciary, somebody that's responsible on the fiduciary side and that actually cares about you as a client, that's a hard part. And I think it takes a couple of unnecessary mistakes unless you come to us directly. Exactly.
Yeah, we will come to it. Very interesting. Now, this question varies from country to country. In your country, are real estate agents subject to any regulatory measures or requirements imposed by law? Are they licensed?
Absolutely. You have to be a licensed broker in Panama in order to broker any sort of transaction regarding real estate. You are very much under the surveillance of the it would be kind of the unit for financial analysis would be the direct translation, and they're under the supervision of the superintendents for non banking persons. So there's a lot of regulation around it. You have to go to the Ministry of Commerce to get your license. You have to go through tests, and you have to. It's a really regulated profession just because of um, the growth of it all and the fact that there's a lot of due diligence that has to happen through these transactions, and just because real estate and banking, uh, there's a lot of gray area stuff that goes on in there, and a lot of black stuff that goes in there, and you have to be very, very strict about those guidelines to a certain degree. Not strict enough that you end up preventing commerce from happening, but strict enough so that you can prevent bad things from happening. Absolutely. So it's a regulated profession for sure.
All right. Now, unfortunately, in some countries, there may be individuals operating as illegal agents who lack the necessary qualifications or licenses. Is this an issue in Panama, and what precautions should our listeners take to avoid these illegal agents?
Absolutely, it's an issue in Panama. I think it's a profession where it's quite easy to get around having a license, which allows for a lot of people to kind of get involved without having the proper license. The first thing you got to do is when you talk to a broker, you got to make sure it's a licensed broker or a licensed brokerage. That's the main thing you have to take into account. If you have a license number from your broker or your brokerage, you shouldn't have to worry about it at all. But it's definitely a profession where that tends to happen just because somebody borrows somebody else's license in order to transact, and they once you get to the signature, they pop up somebody else's license number and name, and it's kind of like, well, none of this was part of the package. So it's a position nobody should be in, and just because I would never recommend a client dealing with a broker who's unlicensed beyond the illegality of it all, just because they would not. The license is sort of like a stamp on that broker's fiduciary responsibility. There's you can get penalized by performing this broker's profession outside of your license, but if you have a license and you do something wrong, now everybody has a structure through which to get to you and go, hey, listen, man, you didn't play this game fairly. So, or something unethical happened. So you always want to be able to, if there's any sort of legal process that has to happen, to have the ability to do that because somebody performed that unethical duty as a licensed professional. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing.
Perfect. All right. Now that we know how real estate agents operates in your country, let's talk a bit more about the rental prices. What are the general rental prices for houses or condominiums in your country? Specifically, maybe like a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom a property. Would you give us a range for something that's in the city center versus something in the outer regions?
Yeah, absolutely. So Panama is a very dynamic market. It's quite small, but it's ultra dense, right? So this kind of creates a situation where there's a couple factors that are going to affect the price here very different, and I'm going to give you kind of the approximations near the end of this argument. There's a couple factors that make it really dynamic. First of all, like I said, it's very dense because of the kind of constructions that are built here. The majority of them are skyscrapers, so you're going to see people are very surprised at this, but barely any buildings have less than 40 floors. So the majority of buildings are very high here, so they house a lot of people. Okay, and it creates for a big market within a single structure. There's a lot of zoning regulations that are very different, within a 20-mile radius. So if you go from one sector of the city to another, it's a completely different zoning, which allows for a completely different type of property, for incentives and all these things. There's special areas that have their own incentives, which affects price. All these things affect the price point for the developer, which ends up affecting the price point for the landlord and eventually the tenant. So if you're in a place that's like Costa del Este, which is where I live, Costa del Este is a very particular place because it's only got 20 years of development to it, but it has a lot of incentives for multinational companies. So they all headquarter here. Because they headquarter here, all their workers headquarter here and live close to here. So it's a huge market for landlords, right? So the renters are doing really well in this part of town because prices go up every single year because Procter and Gamble is here, Philips is here, Samsung is here. The Latin American Export Bank is right here on this street. It's I don't think there's any other street like this in Latin America. So the price points for the apartments obviously go up because the cash flow expectation is so much higher, right? So if you're here to buy an apartment in Avenida La Rotonda, which is the street in Costa del Este where all these multinationals are headquartered, you're not going to see anything below $2,500 a square meter. So that's kind of and it goes up from there. And then if you go to the first line is what they call the buildings that they're in front of the sea, kind of like looking at, have an ocean view. Those have their particular zoning as well, even though it's like one block after Avenida La Rotonda. That zoning is different, and you won't find anything there for less than $3,000 a square meter. It can go up as high as $5,000 a square meter. So this is one street, from where I live, and that's kind of the dynamics of the market are very particular in that way. You won't be renting an apartment for 150 square meters, let's say, which is an average size, for less than $2,000 right now, which is not Miami prices. It's not New York prices. It's significantly lower for tenants, but still pretty decent. You'll be able to buy one of these properties at $320,000, $330,000, rent them for $2,000. It's kind of like 0.7% monthly net, which is a good return. It's a solid return. And that kind of the price in the city. Outskirts, completely different and way more variability. So if you go out into the interior of the country, unless you're in a beach where there's a ton of development, man, you're going to get prices all over the place, okay? Because there's not enough market for the efficiency of a market economy to have price proper. It just doesn't exist. So that's kind of the situation. You can get units in Panama, in the center of the city, in some area, buying as low as $1,800 a square meter, $1,700 a square meter for a middle class apartment, probably.
Okay.
And you can get as expensive as $6,000, $6,500 a square meter in the Old Town, which is it's a historic center. So
wow,
everything in between, man. It's a very dynamic market. It's unlike the Miami and sort of these. It's a very kind of like equalized market, not Panama.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that in-depth analysis right over there. Okay, I'm going to hit you with a little scenario. Let's take me, for example. And I just flew into your country, and being a foreigner, what documents will I need to provide to rent a property in Panama?
Yeah, you'll need to provide, obviously, your ID is the main thing you're going to need to provide. You're going to need to provide banking references. Okay, so one banking reference from a local bank or any bank, that banks with you. If it's international, it doesn't really matter. A commercial reference. So if you're employed, you're going to need to provide a reference letter from your employer. And if you're an independent person, if you're not employed, if you're not salaried, you're probably going to need to provide a tax return of some sort or some information beyond your banking reference, because they need to. The majority of landlords here want to be able to see that you will have the financial ability to afford that apartment. Once you provide those three things, there's really not much else. So a commercial reference, a banking reference, and your IDs, you'd be good to go.
All right. Let's talk about the preliminary financial requirements. Could you shed some light on the booking fees, the deposits, the earnest fees a tenant typically needs to pay on the initial stage of renting?
Absolutely. So if you're a tenant, you're going to be paying 95% of the time, you're going to be paying the first month, and the last month is a security deposit. Okay. So 2 months. One is the first month, and one is the last month as a security deposit. That happens. Normally, the way that we transact here is that we do a reservation with 1 month, and that month will be the security deposit. And then at signing, the tenant pays another month, and that's going to be the first month of the contract, of the lease. Now, this is a seller's market, so buyers don't pay commissions, okay, to brokers. So only sellers pay commissions to brokers, unless you're working with an investment fund that has a finder's fee, which is a different kind of brokerage. You will get paid by the seller or the landlord. So all our commissions from leases, which we get paid a month for, commissions for sales, which we get paid 5% on average from the sale value, they all come from the seller.
All right. Okay. And with regards to deposits, is this something that is written in the law, or is it something that can be negotiated upon?
It is negotiated upon because all real estate. What happened was that the law is really old. They haven't updated it. So the law has this like clause where it talks about anything above I think it's like $150 in lease monthly is free. They call it libre contratación, which means like free contracting between the parts. It basically means whatever you guys come to an agreement for. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a private contract. And because that lease value is so low, everything falls into a private contract. So you could negotiate it. You could say, listen, can we just do 1 month and I'll give you higher rent and I don't have to pay you 2 months up front? I never suggest that, especially to the owner. You know, I'm like, always get a security deposit. You don't know what's going to happen. And all the contracts we write have a clause for penalization. So if somebody wants to leave, you know, something has to stay with the owner if the tenant wants to leave. So it's really that case. You can use paying months in advance as a tenant as a negotiation tactic, but less than 2 months up front, never a good suggestion for either part.
Got it. All right, that's very interesting. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a different country and the deposit system is so different. And
it's so different.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
It's completely, and also who pays the commissions as a broker.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, for the guys that are listening here that are brokers, Boston is a different scenario, right? New York is a different scenario. Like you pay a broker's fee as a tenant.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason why you do that is because it's the opposite situation, the opposite market. You have a buyer's market. You have a landlord market, right? Sorry, you have a buyer's market. It's simply as that. So it's very hard to find an apartment. You know, everything is taken. Not here. The situation is the opposite. It's hard to find clients that are buyers and hard to find tenants. That's really what it is.
One aspect that our listeners often inquire about is the flexibility of a rental agreement. Is there a minimum or maximum term that a tenant typically requires to stay in a property?
Yeah, so the minimum we do is a year. There are shorter terms, and if somebody wants to do short-term rentals, they can totally do that. Now, there is a law in Panama regarding short-term rentals, which are less than 45 days, which is, you know, between 45, 46 days and in a year, you can have a private contract. And if the owner is willing to rent for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, it's his own decision. Normally they do that directly with a tenant because it's hard to pay out a commission on that basis. You know, you have to go into a specific figure, which is a ratio of whatever the total contract is, right? But short-term leases, but below 45 days need a kind of it's kind of like a hotel permit, really. So they need a tourism permit in order to function. So Airbnbs fall under that regulation, right? A year is the minimum term that 90% of landlords are willing to rent for.
What about long-term leases? Maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Is there a difference in that?
No, not really. I mean, you can do a 2, 3, 4, 5 year lease. You can do as long as you want, as long as you both agree on. That situation is one of the. It's kind of like a good question because the perceived benefit of those long-term leases has changed a lot since the pandemic. The pandemic was a period where everybody wanted to rent long-term. You know, everybody was like, "Man, I can't find tenants. Somebody comes in with a 3-year lease, I'll drop them the price down and we'll go to town with that deal." Not anymore, because things are now on the upswing. Landlords are sort of looking at that as a net negative, right? It's like, listen, I'll probably be able to rent it out for 10, 15% more next year. Why would I tie myself down to a 3-year lease? So they're willing to run that risk. Now, depends on the property and it depends on the type of client. If you got a commercial client, you want to lock in that client for 5-year lease. The majority of those guys don't work for lower than that, at least the big guys, right? So they don't like leases that are lower than that because they want to make sure they project their cash flow out properly. So it's a different considerations for sure, but they're not uncommon. They're not uncommon.
All right. And with the frequency of rental payments in a rental property, do they pay monthly, weekly,
Monthly. I've never seen, I've seen contracts where somebody pays up front a couple months, but it's always monthly. Yeah.
Perfect. Because that is also something that many people find interesting in different countries. It varies again. And yet, yeah, it's good to hear that it's monthly over there as well.
I've heard in China they only do yearly payments for some reason. I've heard things like that. I don't know if I have people that I know that live there that tell me that. I know that in Venezuela, where my wife is from, there's so much squatting going on, and there's a lot of judicial protection for tenants, which creates a whole host of problem for the landlords. And now nobody takes you into their apartment unless you pay 9 months up front, right? Because there's a lot of, you feel kind of insecure as an owner. You're like, listen, so these people get squatted any moment and I can't get them out. And that squatting risk really makes up for that sort of negotiation, where people have to pay 9 months up front, 10 months up front, or a year up front. Otherwise they can't rent. So it's hard for young people to live outside their parents' home in Venezuela.
Okay, so a little bit of a side topic here. In the real estate industry, competition plays a significant role. Can you shed some light on the level of competition between agents in your market? Is there a healthy rivalry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the broker. I think in general, it's just the fact that there's so many brokers is makes up a competitive industry by itself, you know? Not every broker is competitive, just like not every person is competitive. And I found that in every single field I've worked in, regardless of the size of the industry, etc. Whoever is there, what's a larger share of the pie? But not everybody has a competitive mindset, I guess. We're very competitive in general, the personality types of the partners. So, we fight about who's going to close internal deals, like, let alone things outside the company. So, I think competitiveness is a quality of an industry, but it's more a quality of a certain type of person. I never like to base strategy on competition because I don't believe it's a good idea. And I believe it ends up making you very similar to other people and other companies. So this is a consideration that if you're an entrepreneur, you should really be thinking about is, why would I compete? If I can find a way to not compete, probably better, right? Harder as an intellectual exercise, harder as a system, is something probably has a lot of risk attached to it unless you understand how to mitigate it. There's actually a great book that is probably the best business book that I've ever read. It's called Blue Ocean Strategy by Chan Kim and Renee Milborn, and everybody has to read that. I think that if you're interested about competition, check it out.
Yeah, I'll write it down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Back to the topic of rental property, specifically with defaulting tenants. And I know we spoke about this a bit just now. Could you please share some insights into how you handle situations when tenants fail to fulfill their rental obligations? What if they decide to pack up their bags and just leave one day? What are the precautions?
Yeah. So we make the precaution right in the contract when we sign them the first time. So we're very careful with that. We got very smart people looking at those contracts, lawyers. We always establish you're going to get penalized if you want to leave before term. You're going to lose your security deposit. Sometimes the penalties are more aggressive depending on the term of the contract, but that's usually what will happen. And you have to give a 60 to 90-day notice. So depending on what is agreed upon at signing, 60 to 90 days is minimum. And during that time, you have to allow for visits, because the owner's going to want to show it, obviously, and you're going to lose your security deposit. There's no way around that. That's the way to deal with defaults, is from the get-go, just mitigating the risk from the get-go. Yeah. If it happens, it's already just contractually agreed upon what the solution is.
Perfect. And now let's flip it around with the landlords. Are there landlords who are unlawful, and how do you deal with these landlords?
I'm very lucky in that way. I've never dealt with a landlord that has tried to not pay us commissions or has done things with a tenant that are, dishonorable. I'm very lucky in that sense. So from experience, I wouldn't know what to tell you in that sense. Everybody we've dealt with, um, not everybody's been great, but things have not gone down that road. Now, I will say this: we're very, we try to be very smart about the contract up front and the commission agreement up front, because once you have those things, everybody's locked into a to an ethical duty to fulfill those contracts. You know what I mean? So formality is very important. Uh, Even though you have your word and that's your bond, you want formality in these negotiations. They cannot exist without the formality. So as long as you peg yourself to that, you shouldn't have anything to worry about.
Perfect. Okay. Um, we're talking about landlords and tenants who are unlawful. And let's talk about the law as a whole. The balance between tenants and landlords' rights is a significant aspect in any rental market. In your professional opinion, can you tell us whether the laws governing these tenants and landlords are equal, or do they favor one side over the other?
I have to admit, Panama is a very equal country in those terms. I think that the law, the fundamentals of the law regarding property rentals, buys, and transactions are very equal to both parts. And I think that I cannot complain about the job that licensed brokers do in that term, because we've set a pretty good standard for what is allowed, what is normal, what is agreed upon, and everybody kind of knows what the deal is, and we make sure that penalties are equal for both sides. When we talk about rental agreements or we talk about sales, penalties have to be equal for both parties, because it doesn't really make sense for one party to be more penalized than the other. Why? You're both entering into an agreement together, So the laws in Panama are pretty great in that sense, man. Like I said, my wife is Venezuelan. The laws in that country are completely against land ownership, right? So they're flipped on their heads, and it's a absolute nightmare to be a landlord. Um, so I'm very happy with Panama in that sense. I don't think there's any major inequality between tenants and landlords.
That's amazing to hear. That's amazing. All right. Um, Earlier, we talked about deposits and how much we have to pay. Can you please clarify when deposits are typically refunded to tenants if there's ever a situation, or are there any conditions that they have to meet before refund?
They should be refunded the day the apartment is given back to the owner. So what happens is that once the lease term ends, the owner, the landlord, and the tenant will meet at the apartment, or the property manager, if the landlord designated one, and they'll look at the property. They'll make sure that there's not damages to the property beyond the normal damages produced by time.
Yeah, fair rent.
And exactly. So if that happens, then the tenant is in all his or her right to receive the refund back for the security deposit if they're giving it back. If there's some major damages or something that has to be taken into account, we'll normally do a report on those things and negotiate a sum for that. It doesn't have to be the total amount, or it could be beyond that amount, right? So if there's damages to something structural, there's something significant, then there's going to be penalties beyond the security deposit. But it's a rare situation, uh, not very usual. And usually the landlord and the tenant get along so well, or the property manager, they've been doing their periodic inspections and they know that the apartment is in order. So they'll even like negotiate to leave the security deposit as last month's rent payment, which is not advised on, but usually, people come to that agreement, which is, again, at the end of the day, if you have a great tenant, you've been a great landlord, you have a great relationship, you've been trustworthy, they've been paying on time, you've been taking care of your side of things, I don't see why not. The fact that If you can come to an agreement around that, it's your decision. If you have suspicions about the status of the property, the integrity of the property, then absolutely don't do that. In general, it's just recommendable to wait until the last day, do the final inspection, then decide what's going to happen.
Right. Okay. And who typically holds these deposits? Is it the landlords? Is there a property management company, or is there maybe a governing body that holds the deposits?
Yes. So this is a great question. So normally the landlord holds the deposit, um, or the property manager. There is a governing body called the Ministerio de Vivienda y Ordenamiento Territorial, which is just like Ministry for Property, let's say. Um, they have a department that holds those deposits, but it's very untrustworthy in terms of the efficiency with which you'll get your money back once the contract ends. So it might take a few weeks or months, and it's like, why do that? So people don't really trust giving their money to them. They actually just released a communication a couple of weeks back where they had a lot of deposits nobody had been coming to take back. These are like 20-year-old deposits, and they decided just they're going to use them for something else. So I was like, it's private money. I don't care if it's 20 years, but this is Central America. So certain things like that, I don't really trust that governing body to leave anybody's money there. So I would suggest a property manager or landlord do that. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, that's so interesting, actually. All right. Now for the final part of the rental section, and this is the juicy part. Scams and abuses of power can unfortunately occur in every country. Could you please highlight any common scams or instances of abuse of power by landlords or tenants, or that individuals should be aware of?
Yeah, well, with landlords, I haven't seen many things happening. Um, Maybe they'll try to not give you back your security deposit, which is obviously illegal. Okay. Um, unless they have a good argument for that and an inspection was made. Like I said, I see a lot of things, not a lot of things, but I see some things happening as far as tenants go. We actually had a situation this year, which I really, really dislike, where we had a tenant that basically falsified all their documents. So we had to realize that this had gone on. And it was not an easy realization because they're a great graphic designer. So, you know, it, some tenants are very willing to go through extremes to get an apartment, and it's not even that they're not going to pay the rent, but they just don't have the ability to produce these references, maybe, and they're willing to make them fake. They're willing to put somebody else's number in them, and so that somebody can, they when somebody calls and gets a reference, it's from one of their buddies that's making as though there's somebody else. Those things happen. Those things have happened. It's only happened to us once, which is, it was a complete surprise. But when things smell bad, you always have an intuition around things. So we were able to act really quick on that. But nobody is safe from those kinds of scams. So you want to be very sure about the person you're renting your property to. That's why there's a due diligence that we enforce. Just because you don't never want to be caught in that situation, So luckily, like I said, this is a country where protection goes both ways. So there's people don't fear this as much. They just want to. They fear more the fact that landlords fear more of the fact that they're going to rent it to somebody that is probably not a great prospect, maybe a triple C instead of a triple A. But they don't think, oh, this is a scammer versus a triple A. It's not a big fear. I will say something. In the interior of the country, now that's a different ballpark because there's so much property that has been left unattended for so long. There's a lot of squatters because it's just you're out in the open in a field or something, and somebody comes in and says, listen, I don't think anybody's been doing any work here for 20 years. Why don't we just put a fence around here, start building something there? Nobody's been coming here. So that's a different issue altogether. You want to be very, very, if you buy land in the interior of the country, you want to directly start taking action on it. I never recommend anybody who wants to come buy land here. If it's very remote, I say, man, if you buy it, start building something there right away. Start getting all your documents around that property right away. Put an electricity bill on it, a utility bill on it. Get all these things there to show that you're acting on your property, because you don't ever want to face squatters in those circumstances.
All right, true. Okay. This is a good segue to the next section of sales and properties. I read something on your LinkedIn profile, and I quote, it's at Panavanti, we firmly believe that it is necessary for Panama to continue acting as a place of refuge for migrants, and relies on Colombian investors looking for opportunities in neighboring countries. And that's amazing because could you please share a bit of information on whether foreigners can buy property in your country and maybe outline the requirements?
Absolutely. So Panama is and has been a refuge for people since probably the 1990s. Throughout the 2000s, it just accentuated even more. Panama's been a refuge because of a couple of reasons. There's a lot of political stability here. There's no re-election. There's very minimal ideology on politicians here. So it's not really a big risk for a lot of Panamanians. They don't see it as a big risk. It's a dollarized country, which we have no central bank. The U.S. takes care of that, and let them do it, for God's sake. So it makes for a big kind of like a good place to go to if things are going bad in your country, you're close by. So Colombians, Venezuelans, that's why they all fled here. Argentinians during the Corralito, they fled here. Uruguayans fled here. Everybody's come here in that sense. And the refuge side is that, and I'm talking about, refuge for capital mainly. Aside from the people who go through these social political circumstances, people see Panama as a refuge for capital. The Panama, because of those circumstances, it's very open to foreign investors. It incentivizes foreign investment, especially in real estate. So if you're a friendly country, it's a little designation that Panama has. So certain countries fall under that list. You'll be able to buy property here, financed through a mortgage for $200,000 total, and get a permanent residency for you and your family. Okay, if you're not a friendly country, it's $300,000 cash. Okay, but it still offers you permanent residency for you, your dependents, and your parents if they're older than 62. So it's like there's a lot of immigration benefits to foreign investment. There's also a ton of tax benefits, obviously, to foreign investment. So it's just a place that incentivizes people coming from outside to invest. It's part of the infrastructure that we've developed in the financial sector.
Huh? Okay. What would be the first piece of document that I would need to sign? And what is the initial down payment? What does it look like if, say, I would like to buy a property in Panama? How does that work?
The very first document you're going to need to sign is a reservation agreement. This is an agreement. It's a private contract between you, the buyer, that is the buyer, and the seller, where the seller agrees to allow for a certain period of time so that the contract can be finalized, the promise of sale, really. It's kind of like an LOI. And once that is signed, you enter into an exclusivity period, let's call it, where the property is out of market, right? So let's say that you're going to buy a $250,000 property. You say, hey, man, listen, I'll give you $5,000 today. Let's do a reservation agreement and take it out of the market. And we're going to do the promise of sale in 2 weeks. That's basically what that agreement says. Private contract. And then you go directly into the promise of sale. The promise of sale is where you will be making the full down payment, taking into account whatever you paid in the reservation, right? For a foreign investor, you're normally looking at 15 to 30%. Okay. I'd say depending on whether you're getting financed or not. You can do smaller than that. You can do lower than that. It's not uncommon, but usually you'd be buying cash. So, that would be kind of the setting. Nationals here get a different, rate and down payment when they get financed. You can get financed in Panama as a Panamanian national as low as 2% of total value. So, in some cases, no brainer to buy it.
All right. And Usually, what would be the loan term if someone were to get a loan over there or a bank loan?
30 years, 20 to 30 years. Yeah, 30 years is the most common for the residential loans mainly. 20 years is common for some commercial loans,
The banking interest rates right now?
They're kind of sitting around 5.75. It's just because the US has raised rates. So it used to be a little bit lower. It can go above 6%. It's probably going to be going above 6% soon. Uh, it's not too high compared to the rest of Latin America at all, right? Uh, I know in Colombia they got like 20% rates now. I'm like, I don't know how to make 20%. How are you paying a mortgage at 20%? So the US is pretty high right now. Unless you're a seasoned investor, you got a good relationship with a bank, your rates are pretty high. And for real estate, I cannot imagine what's going on with those commercial loans and credit cards. So um it used to be lower than that. I know it's never gone as far down as the US has gone. You know, the US, you could get a loan for 2% a couple of years back, 3%. So kind of that. Yeah.
Okay. Now you mentioned what was the document's name again? The main document was
The reservation agreement or the promise of sale?
the promise of sale. So that is So the signing of the promise of sale is a significant milestone in the property purchasing process.
The promise of sale is the definitive agreement.
Okay. Can you clarify when does someone actually sign that? How long does it take to get to that stage of the process?
If you come here today and you say, I want to buy this property, we can sign in 2 weeks, right? So it's very, very fast. So it's basically as fast as both parties want to work together on it. If you do a reservation agreement, normally there's a 2-week period so that you can get to the promise of sale. The promise of sale is I say the definitive agreement because that's where, the down payment has been given, the penalties have been established, the negotiation, no longer negotiations, or the sale period has started. Everything is already negotiated, right? That's very, very soon after the decision is made. 2 weeks to 3 weeks after a decision has been made, after there's a reservation agreement, you'll be signing a promise of sale.
When does the handover of the property take place? Is that
the way that it works here? So like you do the promise of sale, things get sorted out, taxes that have to be paid on the property, to leave it in good standing. I don't know how you say that in English, but so that everything is ready for a transfer, basically. Depending on whether it was bought with a mortgage or it was bought cash, it can take anywhere between 2 to 4 months, right? I've done closings in 20 days, 20 to 30 days, which are cash buys. Things move fast because everything is set up and guys ready to release the money as soon as the property's out. It gets handed over when the property goes into public registry. And now public registry has registered that there's a new owner. And then the final payment is is given. Yeah.
all right? So that basically 20 days or 4 months.
With a mortgage, it's never going to be less than 3. It just happens to be that way. And if there's mortgages on both sides for different banks, that's a different animal as well.
Right. Okay. Great. So I've purchased a property and now I've decided to sell it. Now, taxes related to property purchases and disposals are important considerations. Can you please provide some information on the taxes typically involved for purchasing a property and also disposing of a property?
Yeah. When you buy, you're just buying into the taxes of the property, as you own it. So you're going to be paying property taxes once you own it, right? Can be 1% of total cadastral value is kind of the property tax average. Certain buildings and certain constructions in certain places are exonerated from property tax. When you're a seller is when you should worry, really, because you got 10% cost as a seller for the transfer. You got 5% for broker commission, and you got 3% for capital gains. If there are any capital gains, you'll pay 3% of those gains. And there's 2% of property transfer tax. So the the Panamanian law basically takes into account a property transfer as into two separate laws. One is property law, and the other one is kind of like asset gains, if that makes any sense at all. So they tax your gains from the asset, from buying and selling, and they also tax you to do the whole transfer of the property. Uh, I think that one of those would suffice, and they're probably wasting half of it anyway, the government. So, but it's kind of the situation here. If you demonstrate losses, you don't pay that 3%. So that's pretty much what it is. Those are the taxes you're going to face. This is significant ones.
Um, Now, with cultural considerations can play a significant role in property transactions. Could you please highlight any cultural considerations that buyers and sellers should keep in mind when engaging a property transaction in Panama?
Yeah, it's Panama's a strange context in that sense because it's very multicultural, right? So there's a lot of we've done deals with different people from different nationalities and all these things. So cultural differences definitely do play a role. It's people are very straight up here, Um, there's a lot of very tough negotiators. So negotiations sometimes get hardened by the fact that people that are aggressive in the negotiation, you know, are working in it. It happens a lot. Panamanian people are very tough negotiators. So that's kind of what you have to take into account. I would never suggest anybody to deal with a tough negotiator in terms of like bowing down to a tough negotiator. I think there's, you know, regardless of a cultural difference, what I've come to find across my entire career in sales is that you have to have negotiation abilities. And these are cross-cultural, right? Once you have those negotiation abilities, you have to kind of find a way to fit them into the culture, but they're still kind of the same, right? Um, you want to be able to balance price versus terms. And that happens a lot in any real estate negotiation, the way I think about it is like, hey, if you're going to set your price, I'm going to set some terms, and if I set my price, you're going to set terms. Um, so eh, things kind of happen in that sense. Panama is a country that moves at a slower pace than the US, than Asian countries. It definitely does. Things don't work as fast here. So I'd say that one thing you want to take into account culturally is run with a pace, right? So uh, don't be scared if things take a little bit longer than what you're accustomed to if you're coming from outside and doing deals in the outside. It's just the way things work here. So it's important to know that because sometimes you exert unnecessary pressure onto things.
All right. Thank you so much for the insight. All right. So for the last question of this segment, and again, this is the juicy bit. Horror stories in the process of selling a property can be unfortunate and provide valuable lessons as well. Could you please share any cautionary tales that you've encountered while assisting your clients in selling their properties?
We had one deal that got to the last day allowed by the promise of sale to finalize the deal. We literally inscribed in public registry that day. It happened because it was early on and we were dealing with a transaction. It's a purchase for a property for $185,000. And it was a 2 mortgage deal. So it was mortgage on the buyer, mortgage on the seller. We were not aware about the difficulty in communication between banks and the way they deal with brokers. And it can be difficult to manage that transaction if it's your first time. So if I can give any form of suggestion, instead of trying to learn by your experience, which is very, painful, try to understand that process very well. Sit down with the person at the bank that's dealing with your client's, mortgage release or mortgage transfer and all these things, and make sure you understand how they're going to work with the other bank. And make sure you understand every single little milestone and detail that happens there so you're never lost. You don't want to be lost in these processes because it can take a lot of time to catch back up. And sometimes you're unaware of the fact that somebody's been stalling for 2 weeks just because they haven't, nobody's pushing them into doing something, and you end up eating up time for the deal to get closed. So knowing the process is very important. Very, very important. It will save you a lot of nightmares. You do not want to be that guy. When we were doing that transaction, we're like, listen, this is very serious. We got to get this today. So we worked our asses off to get it to it. It had been our first experience doing that. So if I could say something that is useful is learn the process. Don't be afraid to go in and ask the questions, and make sure you follow up with the people involved in the logistics of it. And centralized communication is a big thing for me. Is like, I want to make sure that if people can be on the same page in one channel, do that. Don't be a messenger.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to wrap this up right now with, I'm going to do this a rapid fire round. We'll dive into the world of real estate with a quick and spontaneous question. We can get started. And remember, there are no wrong or right answers, just whatever comes to mind first. Are you ready for the first question?
Go ahead.
All right. Now, tell us your dream location for property investment.
Worldwide? Dream location or Panama?
Anywhere. Anything.
Dubai, probably.
All right. Most expensive property you've ever dealt with?
$12 million hotel we're dealing with right now. It's the most expensive property we've dealt with.
All right. Perfect. One word to describe the current state of the property market in Panama.
The current state of the property market in Panama is a buyer's market.
Perfect. All right. And last question, best piece of real estate advice you've ever received?
Make sure that things are simple enough, but no more than that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I want to thank you so much for the time and experiences that you have. Your knowledge will bring us around the world. And before we wrap this up, this is your time for the audience to hear what you have to offer them, or any advice that would you like to tell them as well. So take it away.
Absolutely. By the way, if anybody heard me in Boston, I think I said Boston was a buyer's market, or maybe I made that mistake. It's a seller's market, so that I don't get any of my Boston friends sending me threats on social media. But if you guys can follow us on Instagram, we're putting up a new videos on YouTube. Now we don't have that many there, but we have a lot of content on Instagram, which is where I suggest people follow us on. Shai Bar-Ziv on Instagram is my personal brand, which is growing very rapidly. Shai Bar-Ziv on LinkedIn. I post a lot on LinkedIn, and I do a lot of webinars there. We've done a couple of them so far this year that are very helpful for investors or brokers, anybody looking to learn about real estate in Panama, real estate in general, entrepreneurship, sales. I love talking to people. If you want to send me a message on Instagram, I'll be sure to get back to you. And it won't be me, it won't be some assistant. So I encourage everybody to get in touch if they'd like to understand more about this market, real estate, entrepreneurship, sales, investment, all those things.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shai. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Property Passport. And until next time, keep exploring and keep discovering. Thank you for listening to Property Passport. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and gained valuable insight into the world of real estate. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to us on our website or social media channels. Remember to subscribe to Property Passport so you never miss an episode, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners. Tune in for another exciting episode where we'll explore another country's property market and share more tips and tricks to help you succeed in the real estate world. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep exploring.